Okay, this is a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're going to start off with a moment of silent meditation, and we'll say the Serenity Prayer together. Thank you, Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. And this group likes to recite the preamble together. It's right up here, I think, isn't it? Where is it? Right behind me. So, you ready? Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship, men and women, who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other. They may solve their common problem and help others recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking, and there are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. And AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Very good. Excellent job. I hope, Tom, you got all that on your CD. We need to dazzle the people around the world with that. Okay, it is customary and traditional in this group to read a portion of Chapter 5 from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And our friend Janelle doesn't know it, but she's going to come up here and do it for us. Or you can do it right from there if you like.
It's on page 58, Chapter 5, How It Works. My name's Janelle, and I'm an alcoholic. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunate. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided you want what we have, and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. At some of these we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. Here are the steps we took which are suggested as a program of recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed, and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Many of us exclaimed, "What in order? I can't go through with it." Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter 2, the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. And C, that God could and would.
Very good, Janelle. Very good job. Okay. It's time for a message from our sponsor. Where's our secretary?
Hi, I'm Sarah, your alcoholic secretary.
Hi, Sarah.
We meet here every Sunday at 12:30. It's an hour-and-a-half meeting. Therefore, we pay extra rent, so if you can, please be generous. We celebrate the last Sunday of the month, so if you're celebrating an anniversary, please give me your name and your how many years, so that I can have a medallion for you. And if you'd like to be a member of this group, you are when you say you are, and I'll be glad to take your name. And that's it.
You're taking names these days, huh?
I will. Take your name.
Watch it, guys. Okay, anybody who's been out improving their resume and is just coming back and would like to give us your first name? Yes, sir.
My name is Ken. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Ken. All right, we're glad to have you back. Let's give him a hand. Anyone who's brand new, just getting started with us, don't know what in the hell's going on in here, but you're hoping to find out. We'd like to know your name if you'd like to give it to us. Nobody? Nobody's owning up to it. Do we have anyone who's visiting us from other groups from out of town, out of state, or outer space?
My name is Barbara. I'm a grateful recovered alcoholic.
Where are you from, Barbara?
Delray Beach. Not
Del-
too far, but
Delray Beach, okay. That's not exactly from Venus, is it? Where else? Anyone else visiting? Let's give Barbara a hand. Terrific. Okay, we got all the business taken care of. Now let's open our books up, please, to Roman 26 or 28. That'll be XXVI or XXVIII, depending on which edition you have. We are in the doctor's opinion. And let's first of all be sure we're all on the same page with this. Dr. Silkworth, who wrote this, is a guy who had all the credentials in the world for writing what he wrote. He'd been the director of Towns Hospital in New York City for about 20 years, treating alcoholics and drug addicts. That was the purpose of that hospital. He had been, not only had he been involved in trying to get alcoholics and addicts clean and sober, but he had been, for the last 3 years, he'd been watching the AA people come into his hospital and found that they were having successes with those men whom he had consigned to the junk heap. That they were chronics and he couldn't help them. And these guys from AA were coming in and something wonderful was happening. These chronics were getting sober and staying sober. And so he'd gotten to know the people from the New York group very well, especially Bill. And when he was asked to write this opinion, he was very happy to do so. It gave him an opportunity not only to express in writing what he had come to understand as the director of this hospital, but also to give a boost, a pat on the back, a kind of an endorsement to the AA movement. Now remember that we started last week examining his opinion. Remember that he expressed himself right up front that he and his colleagues in the hospital were dealing with what he called synthetic knowledge, we usually these days call it the human solution or the professional solution or the medical solution or the psychiatric solution, as opposed, and as contradistinction, of course, to the spiritual solution. Dr. Silkworth called it synthetic. And he knew by the time he wrote this that there were simply people that they could not reach. And it didn't really make any difference what they tried. And they had all the various experts. They knew exactly what in the world they were doing. In terms of medical and psychiatric knowledge, they were without peers. But you know, when they wrapped them up in hot sheets and cold sheets and ran them through hot baths and cold baths and poisoned them with belladonna and tried to make Pavlovian dogs out of them, and they did all of this stuff. They put them on the couch and psychoanalyzed them. They put them into encounter groups. They yelled at them. They cajoled them. They did everything they could think of, and they didn't get to first base with the chronic alcoholics, because we are not susceptible or amenable to the human solution. And so when he wrote this article, this opinion, he knew what he was talking about, and he was already convinced that the guys in AA had come upon a solution which was impossible for the people in his hospital to contemplate. They knew that they did not have the ability to infuse their patients with what they called moral psychology. Now, we remember last week we were reading a paragraph, which is the first full paragraph on the second page of the doctor's opinion, and I told you then that this paragraph is of extreme importance to the first step, because it ties in directly with the definition of the first step that we find on page 30. That is Arabic 30, the first page of the third chapter, which tells us that we learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. And then it says, the delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed. The idea that somehow, someday, he can enjoy and control his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker, the big book says. And for most of us, we carry that in the door with us. That has to go, because the first step cannot be taken with reservations and be effective. We have to be able to come to a place where we accept as a fact that we can never drink again. The plug is in the jug. Now, nowhere is that as well explained or as succinctly stated as we find right here in the doctor's opinion. Let's take a look. Right at the top of the page, 4 lines down. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. Dr. Silkworth has set us apart, and in his long and vast experience he had every reason to believe that this was true. A separate class of human beings, people who are allergic to the substance alcohol. Not only does the ingestion of alcohol set off a phenomenon of craving, which means that once we start, it's nearly impossible for us to stop, and in some cases it is impossible, but that somehow or another alcohol seems to react in our bodies and our minds more radically than it does with other people. But that's not all. Here's what he says. These allergic types, talking about you and me now, can never Now, what don't we understand about the word never? Can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. If you stop and think about it, the first step requires that we have accepted that as a fact, that we do not come into the rest of the steps with reservations of any kind, that we do not take the rest of the steps saying, well, somewhere along the line, maybe this obsession that I can drink again will go away. But it doesn't happen that way. That's why the big book is so succinct and so perfectly accurate in telling us right from the get-go. We're talking about the first step. The obsession that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed. And if you're new or if you're working with new people, the doctor's opinion is the place to start with that whole concept. He's making it clear, is he not, that we do not have any escape hatches here. We're not going to come in here and learn how to drink like ladies and gentlemen. Not if we are real alcoholics, not if we are chronics. Then we found out in the next paragraph that frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices, which means, of course, that all of that stuff that people have been telling us out there about why we ought not to drink and how we are damaging our families, how we're damaging ourselves at the job, how we're damaging our health and our minds, how we are simply not understanding that we've got to modify and hold off and just drink a little bit. The whole idea of abstinence is not something which is generally accepted in the public. They want us to just not drink so much. You hear it from the pulpits, and it used to be when the temperance movement was going on. It was always through the churches, and they didn't talk about abstinence. They talked about holding off. Don't drink quite so much. I think I mentioned last night. I remember a preacher giving as the example. Now here's this drink. You take this drink. Here's another drink. You pour it back. Now you have another drink. You can get to drink that. Get this one. You pour it back. Can you imagine? Let's just say. Let's say that we have a pitcher of martini sitting here, right? Now we're going to pour a martini. We're going to drink it. We're going to pour another one and pour it back. Well, maybe we'll pour it right back in again. See, they just don't understand. Abstinence means the plug is in the jug, period. And so, frothy emotional appeal is not directed toward that. It's directed toward making us feel guilty, making us feel bad about what we're doing, making us come to church, for example, or go lie down on a psychiatrist's couch for 5 years. Do all of these things so that we can learn not to drink so much. But then he goes on to say, the message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. And what he means by that is in nearly all cases their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. Which, of course, takes us right up to chapter 4, doesn't it? And chapter 4 tells us the same thing, that lack of power is our dilemma. That is, we have no power over alcohol. Matter of fact, we have no power over our thinking at all. And that we have to find a power by which we can live. And it has to be a power greater than ourselves. And then it asks the rhetorical question, where and how are we to find this power? And then it says, well, that's what this book's all about. Its main purpose is to enable you and me to find a power greater than ourselves which will solve our problem. 2 lines later it says this means we're going to talk about God. The big book doesn't mess around with this God stuff, it comes right out and says it. We hear higher power now and then, or power greater than ourselves, but most of the time it's God. Well, this may or may not be some kind of a generic 3-letter word that we use interchangeably among ourselves for whoever or whatever we think of as being our higher power. But nevertheless, we all pretty well understand it when we talk about God. We're not talking about the group. We're not talking about a pickup truck or an ashtray or a doorknob. We're talking about a deity. We're talking about what we call God. And so Dr. Silkworth is saying that our ideals, and by that he means our entire thinking process. It means our moral sense, our ethical sense. But more than that, our ideal for how we wish to live our lives. Remember, when we get into the 4th step, it talks about if we have fallen short of the chosen ideal. And it talks about our ideal for our future sex life. It's the same ideal. That's the same concept of ideal that Dr. Silkworth is talking about, that our ideals must be grounded in a power greater than ourselves if we are to recreate our lives. That's the depth and weight of this program. We do not offer human solutions here. We don't. We offer 12 spiritual steps and a fellowship to back them up, and a big book which tells us, gives us a great deal of information about how to work these steps, gives us the directions for doing the work, and it shows us what we need to do. And it also helps us to break down our walls of denial, helps to bring us hope. So let's go on now. This is new material from starting right now today. The 3rd full paragraph on page either Roman 28 or Roman 26. If any feel that as psychiatrists directing a hospital for alcoholics we appear somewhat sentimental, let them stand with us on a while on the firing line. See the tragedies, the despairing wives, the little children. Let the solving of these problems become a part of their daily work, and even of their sleeping moments. And the most cynical will not wonder that we have accepted and encouraged this movement. What does it tell us back in chapter 7? Stay on the firing line of life, and God will protect us. We have these motives. I remember when I was standing before a judge 4 years ago, and he was about deciding whether to stick me away in prison for a couple of years. He asked me if I wanted to speak, and I said yes. I said, the fellowship that I belong to, and the big book of that fellowship tells me to stay on the firing line of life, and that's exactly what I want to do. And he said, Mr. Bramble, I agree with you. And he looked at the federal attorneys, the U.S. attorneys, and he said, this is a travesty, I'm letting this man go. So I walked out of there that day to get back on the firing line of life. And this is what Dr. Silkworth is talking about, that firing line. And this is where we belong. Remember what the big book tells us? We're to keep our heads in the clouds with Him, but our feet firmly planted upon the ground, because it's there where our fellow travelers are, and it's there where our work must be done. So that's what we do. And when we do that, we get to have a life beyond anything we could ever have devised for ourselves. We get to have our heritage to be happy, joyous, and free. We get to have those things that we could never buy, no matter how many billions of dollars we threw at it. We couldn't buy it. But we get to have it, provided we're willing to take our message and take it out and help others and stick close to God and do His work and follow His directions and be obedient. And so Dr. Silkworth is telling us here that we may, in reading this, you may think, well, what's the matter with these psychiatrists? Are they going soft on us? I mean, after all, these folks pretty much have an answer for everything, don't they? Well, some of them are humble enough to admit they don't know everything. But many people within that profession and in the other healing arts, it seems as if they have a tough time admitting their humanness. And so here they are, they're saying, whoa, we don't know everything here. We have come up against a stone wall. There are people here that we cannot help. Remember what Dr. Jung, Carl Jung, said to Roland Hazard when Roland went back to him after being over there with Dr. Jung for a year, and he'd been all taken apart and put back together, and he knew everything about himself, and he was all cured, and he came back and he drank again. Went back to Switzerland, and Dr. Jung finally had to look him in the eye and say, you're one of those we can't help. There isn't anything that's going to help you except a massive spiritual experience, a psychic upheaval, and I can't give it to you. So these folks recognized the fact that they were dealing with something here which they couldn't do anything about. And you see, Dr. Silkworth had come to understand, we're going to read about a little later, that this disease of ours is invariably fatal. Not only does he understand it, but many of the doctors who were then trying to help us agreed that the alcoholic who continues to drink is doomed. In fact, that's the word he uses. We'll see that a little later. Doomed. He goes on to say this. The most cynical will not wonder that we have accepted and encouraged this movement. We feel, after many years of experience, that we have found nothing which has contributed more to the rehabilitation of this men than the altruistic movement now growing up among them. Altruistic. Everybody knows the meaning of that word, right? We do everything for free. We give it away. We ask nothing in return. Altruistic, a wonderful word. And it goes right to the heart of our program, doesn't it? Because I don't know if I've known a few people who charged for 12-step work, but I didn't get to know them very long because they didn't last. Sometimes a couple times in my sobriety, I've been pretty broke, and I was tempted, just put a little ad in the paper. If you got alcoholism, I'll fix you, just call Jim. $40 an hour. Never did it, though. It would have only taken a short time before I'd been snatched right out of recovery, be back into the gates of hell again. Going on now. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. That is the truth, is it not? And isn't that a pretty good definition of insanity? Anybody doubt that when they walked in that door they were screwy as hell? Nuts, balmy, goopy. Oh, man. Can't distinguish the true from the false. And yet, we look in our big book and it tells us that there's a power out there that can restore us to sanity. And then lo and behold, when we get up around the 10th step, what's it tell us? That sanity will have returned. We have been restored to sanity. It's worked. It's the truth. We get to be restored to sanity. We no longer have the excuse. What do you expect? I'm just a sick alcoholic. People go around talking as if there is alcoholic behavior for those of us in recovery. Have you been watching those normies out there lately? You think that we're unique in the kind of screwy stuff that we do? No way. We got to give up all those excuses, you know. It starts right out when we get sober at first and we find out we have a disease. And then we find out that there's a remedy for this disease. It's a spiritual remedy. Nobody around here is talking about taking shots or eating pills or lying on somebody's couch or being torn apart in an encounter group. We're talking about finding God, surrendering to God, learning to be obedient to God, and letting God have His way with us. That's what we're talking about. And we look around, and by golly, it works. Here are people who are recovering, even though you might not think it ought to work. Doesn't sound very rational. Of course it's not, because it's paradoxical. Cannot differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. Nobody in here identifies with that, I'm sure. Doesn't everybody drink? Oh, there are a few kind of stick-in-the-muds over here, you know, but we don't have anything to do with them. They're no fun. Everybody I know drinks like I do. Of course, we didn't stop to think that we've been very carefully choosing our friends over the years to make sure that if they didn't drink when we met them, we made sure they started drinking before we had anything more to do with them. We like to drag people into bars with us. We like to make sure that when they came to our house that the bottle was the first thing that came out on the table. We didn't want to drink alone. Remember Bill sitting there in his kitchen, and Ebby called up, and Bill was delighted because Ebby was going to come over, and Ebby and he could sit down and have a drink together. That's what they'd always done. It felt good for Bill at that time because he was sitting there wrapped up in his own misery. I think that's probably why we want people to drink with us, isn't it? We don't want to be miserable alone. Now this next sentence has been kind of, I think maybe people misunderstand it, and so they misuse it. The word they are restless. They means the people who are still drinking. We're not talking here about people in recovery. They, those who are still drinking, are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks which they see others taking with impunity. See, the danger with that, if we were to take that restless, irritable, and discontent, and we move it over here to recovery, then we run a risk, just the same risk we run with HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Take those 4 and those 3, put them together, you got 7 things. What's that? Don't get too restless, irritable, or discontented. Don't get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And what? You won't drink? No. You see, we're missing the point, aren't we? We drink because we are alcoholics and we are powerless over alcohol, and we cannot fight the obsession and compulsion to drink. We have to understand that. As soon as we begin to look for human solutions, we get clear off base. If it is a spiritual disease, a spiritual problem, and has a spiritual remedy. Now, of course, it would be very nice if we never were restless, or if we were seldom irritable. I'm sure everybody around us would be happy with that. We would love to be contented all the time. We certainly don't want to have to go hungry. It's not good for us to get angry. Nobody likes to be lonely. And if we watch it, we don't have to get tired. But so what? Hoo-ha. All those things perfectly will not keep us sober. All of those things imperfectly will not make us drink. You see? Because our problem doesn't have anything to do with those things. It has to do with spiritual bankruptcy. And the solution has to do solely with one thing, getting a loving God between us and booze. Because we're powerless over the booze. We can't stop drinking on our own, and it doesn't matter what else is going on in our lives. We can get wealthy and we will get drunk. We can get poor and we can get married and get drunk. We can get divorced and get drunk. We can leave the country and get drunk. We can come back to the country and get... Nothing works. You see? And this means that we've got to watch it because it's so easy to fall into these traps. Here's another thing that I'd like to suggest to you. The human solutionists out there are always talking about triggers. Trigger this and trigger that, you know. Something like Gene Autry's horse, I guess. But if you accept the premise that we have a disease, that we are dealing with an insanity, if we are dealing with obsession over which we have no power, if we're dealing with not only obsession but a compulsion over which we have no power, if you accept those things, if you accept that because we have no power we cannot stop drinking on our own, if you accept that there's only one solution and that's to put a higher power between us and the booze, then all of this other stuff becomes irrelevant. That's why the big book tells us in chapter 7 that any attempt to shield the sick man from temptation is bound to fail. And it tells us that if we can't face life as life is, as everybody else in the world does, as normal people do, there's something wrong with our spiritual condition. And so it all goes back to that again. See, we can't get away from this. As so long as I am spiritually fit, I can go anywhere and do anything that any other person in this world can do. The only proviso being that I have proper motive for being there. And when we take our 12th step, and we're working on our 12th step and our 10th and 11th steps, we get to take a PhD in recovery where we learn how to be consciously aware of our motives so that we don't confuse right action as if that were the whole ball game, because right action with the wrong motive is just as hard on us, just as deadly as wrong action. So we get to be well aware of our motives. And all these things, though, are a matter of gifts that just keep coming to us. And as long as we're following directions, we're going to get it. You're going to get these things if you want them or not. I did. I'm not sure I want any of this stuff. But it kind of snuck up on me. And it was fast. I was doing my 11th step when I was 47 days sober. And I was slow. I should have had it done a long time before. But I had a big excuse. I was practicing law in Beverly Hills. And that's enough to distract anybody. But you see, from that day on, I had no more excuses left. I had to put them all aside. I couldn't get up here and say to you, I'm 15 years sober and I'm still sick. Why? Sick with what? Did you work your steps? Well, sort of. What you're really saying to me then is you've been sober for 15 years, which means that you haven't had a drink for 15 years, and for all that time you've been walking around with untreated alcoholism. And you're one poor, miserable slob, and I feel so sorry for you. I wouldn't be in your shoes for all the tea in China. Because recovery for us doesn't mean not drinking. Sobriety for us is not drinking. Sobriety for us is a spiritual awakening. Sobriety for us is having all of the things which are promised to us, including being able to take life on as life is, to face life on God's terms and deal with it, to be a conscious denizen of the world of the Spirit, to be God conscious, to have a close connection with our higher power so that we can be inspired by Him, to be restored to sanity. You see, that's what we have. That's sobriety for us. I heard somebody say last night, If you didn't have a drink today, you're a winner. Where in the world does that come from? I don't know, I guess it sounds pretty good. Why don't we say this, if you didn't have a drink today, you're a miracle. Then we got it right. I didn't win anything. I was given a miracle. And when we understand that, then we got it right. If you didn't have a drink today, you're a miracle. And every one of us, when we came through that door, was a miracle. The second great miracle of our lives, the first when we were born. And for each one of us in here, there are 10 out there who will never make it. Thank you, God, for the chance and the opportunity.